data collection, what kind of information can be collected, some potential use cases, some things that we've been asked about, an overview of our product, which allows you to collect the passive data, a short discussion on privacy and security, which of course everything these days connected to the interwebs or smartphones seems to run up against privacy, and that's something that we're very interested in this subject. And then, as Gina said, a Q&A session. Please feel free to post your questions on the GoToMeeting application. You'll see there's an area there for communicating. And if you have any questions after we finish, feel free to email us. We'd be happy to help you. What's passive data collection? Passive data collection is via a mobile application that runs with the user's consent on a smartphone. It allows you to collect information from smartphones on how they're being used from the sensors that are in smartphones. And we have to remember that smartphones are very, very complicated devices, and we're going to come on to that a bit later because it impacts on what you can collect, and it in fact has a lot to do with the way we see the future of passive data collection on smartphones. We can measure a lot on smartphones, things like what applications are running, the amount of data people have communicated back and forth over Wi-Fi. We can't, of course, look at that data, but we can see the volume that passes to and fro. The battery life of the smartphone, whether or not it is connected to Wi-Fi, and in fact we can get the name of the wireless network, the location via GPS, and various information about the operating systems. As I mentioned before, smartphones are becoming increasingly complicated, and there are an increasing number of smartphones. With all sorts of different nuances, screen differences. But for us, we're really interested in how the smartphones are evolving to be mobile computers, because that's really what they are. If you start getting involved with developing applications on smartphones, you realize that these devices are capable of doing pretty much anything that your laptop or even your desktop computer can do. I don't know how many people still use desktops. There don't seem to be very many. But it really is amazing the capabilities of these machines. Tablets such as an iPad are very, very similar to an iPhone, and people, there's a lot of information on the web about how to use your tablet as you would a laptop computer. And it's going that way with smartphones. The limitation, of course, is the screen size. Then again, there are things like the phablets, as they are called, which are very large smartphones, almost like iPad minis. So we're getting a lot of blurring of the edges between your laptop devices, maybe, tablets and smartphones. Smartphones are very, very powerful. And using the word phone is really an anachronism. We should really call them our mobile computers. And people are beginning to realize that make certain devices. Now, the device up here is called a sensor drone. It's actually quite small. You can't get any idea of the size of that, and would almost fit on a keychain. And this allows you to collect a huge amount of information about the environment around you, things that normally we wouldn't have been able to do. But because we have smartphones and the ability to interface to a wide range of devices, you can do that. And we feel that this is something that's going to become more and more common and becomes more and more relevant to the way that mobile computers, smartphones, are going to be used in the future. Going back to the operating systems that smartphones use, they can be very different. The two that we currently focus on are iOS, which is, of course, the Apple operating system, and Android. These are the most commonly used systems on smartphones. We haven't yet investigated Windows Mobile. We're open to do it. It's just that the market penetration is so small. We haven't really had a request so far to look at those devices. So what we're going to talk about in this webinar is really based around Apple machines or around Android. And when we look at these machines, when we look at smartphones running either of those systems, there's quite a lot of data. We can get data on what's called an accelerometer. This measures the movement of the phone. For instance, when you drop it or when you're walking or running, it can tell how much the phone or device is moving, which is actually pretty interesting. This is commonly used with a lot of the apps that are out there for measuring how much you run, or for the pedometer, which is how much you walk. So it's actually in use in a lot of applications already, but we haven't seen it used a lot in survey research. GPS, of course. Your smartphone can know where it is, and that's actually really important when we get onto the concepts of geofencing and triggering data collection according to locations. On Android phones, we can do what's called an Appt Census. That means we can look at what applications are actually installed on the smartphone. We can't do that on Apple. They don't allow that because of security concerns. And we think that probably in the future, Android will stop us looking at the applications that are installed. I don't have any big reason to think that, but I suspect they will deem it a security issue in the future. What we can look at on both systems is app usage. That is, what apps are currently running, what apps the user is potentially using at that time. We can look at the battery, we can see how much of the memory is used, we can tell what sort of networks they're connected to. We can look at the Wi-Fi, we can tell how much data is being transferred, we can get the name of the Wi-Fi connection. Compass, we can get the idea of the orientation. We can work out what the sound setting is for the device, the decibel level for playback through headphones. We can look at the disk space. We can get the orientation of the phone through the gyroscope. We can find out the IP address of the connection to any networks. Of course, we can know what operating system. For iOS, we can see if it's got this thing called a retina display, and as I mentioned before, in connection with the Wi-Fi, we can tell the name of the connection that the phone may be connected to. This is all relatively technical information that commonly the form of this information isn't really used in survey research at the moment, or within the context of market research, but we feel that this is going to have to change. We've also gone through here, and for the presentation, if you want to download it, showing you what you could collect on the different versions phones between the iOS and Android. As I said before, we can't do an app census on Apple. We can get all the other information, except of course Android doesn't have the concept of a retina display, so you can't find that out. But it's remarkably similar across the systems what you can collect. There are some differences in the way they represent that data that means we have to normalize the data or transform it. But across the two systems, it's quite clear that you can get the same information. I want to talk now about some potential use cases before we look a little more at the data that can be collected. There are already apps out there that will help you monitor your sleep patterns. You put your smartphone on the bed beside you. It records your movements, how much you thrash around. In my case, it will probably record how often the dog stomps across the bed in the middle of the night, that kind of stuff. And then it'll give you an idea of your sleep patterns and how well you're sleeping. These things are already available. And we know there's a huge industry about measuring movement. You can measure how much people move. And it seems an interesting fact in terms of research, in terms of researching as we are human behavior, that we know that people may say, for instance, that they're very active, but that probably doesn't match what they actually do. And that will probably be the case here in Homer. He'd probably say he's a good runner, runs all the time, but that's probably not true. And one thing smartphone passive data allows us to do is to measure things objectively without the intervention of the respondent's report and recollection. Of course, GPS is one of the most common things that is used in survey research on smartphones. We can know where people are. Remember, this is always done with consent, which we're going to talk about later. We can know where people are, and we can use that GPS location to trigger passive data collection. For instance, when somebody goes into a store, we could start doing an app census and start looking at what apps they're running, or take a snapshot of what's going on their machine at that point, or even doing things like measuring the movement of people. There are interpretation difficulties with that, but we can trigger the collection of this data via people's location and a variety of other things. As I said, in retail applications, we can see if people are running Facebook or using ShopSavvy. ShopSavvy is a very common application and allows you to go into stores and compare the price of something. Might be a book, or it could be something you're buying from the furniture section, with stores around you, also with what you can get on Amazon. And I've used this several times. It's really interesting to see how much it might be less if you just drive up the road to a different store, and very often, of course, the price is less on Amazon. And it's becoming an increasingly common application of smartphones to do that kind of price checking. And we can see via an app audit whether or not people are running ShopSavvy when they go into the mall, for instance. Okay, now I'd like to talk really about our applications and the kind of passive data that we can collect via our suite of tools. I work for a company called Survey Analytics. We develop and market data collection tools and analysis tools. We have tools that will run on iPads, such as Survey Pocket. The ones we're going to talk about today are Survey Swipe, which is our smartphone interviewing system, and Life Metrics, which is a module within Survey Swipe which collects passive data. Just to give you an idea of some of our clients, they range from Zynga, the game people, to Kantar Media, Liberty Mutual, Insurance, all the way over to McGraw-Hill, Microsoft, and Bose. So we have a very varied client base. As I said, the two modules we're going to talk about a little bit about today: Survey Swipe, that is the smartphone interviewing system, and the module within that, Life Metrics, which allows you to collect passive data. Currently, we allow the download of the passive data in an XLS file format. That allows you to analyze in Excel or other statistical packages. The whole mass of data and the way you report it, because it isn't survey data, means that we're having to develop different ways of reporting and analyzing this data, which I'll talk on a bit later. But it is an interesting problem because we're really moving outside the boundaries we had with traditional survey research in collecting data that really researchers may not have seen before. Now, here's an example of the output when you would be measuring the accelerometer data. We can set up the system so the data is measured periodically, triggered by a location or the start of a survey, and of course there's a timestamp there showing what time the data was collected. On smartphones, they actually have three ways of measuring movement in three axes, X, Y, and Z. What we actually do to make it more manageable is we generate this composite score, which you'll see is the last column there, and that's an aggregation of all the other movements. So it gives you a single number, which gives you an idea of how much that phone has moved over the period of time. And in fact, this is one of our employees, and this is actually over several days. Her phone was moving, and it was not moving, as you can see that the graph goes up and down. And you can link this in time to where people are, and this gives you some idea perhaps of how they navigate a store. I know that in the retail world they have been looking at this movement data, and so far they're not exactly clear how to use it. But I think it is important data for other contexts. For instance, if you are, as I said before, asking people how active they are, and they may tell you that they're very active and they run all the while, but via this kind of data you can get a much more objective measurement of people's activity levels, which for a number of things can be very important. I think one of the more interesting forms of data that we can collect is actually the app audit, the app usage. Now, here I'm showing actually two different systems. On the left-hand side is a column showing some, not all, of the applications that we can see that are installed on an Android phone. And as you can see, there's Google+, the Survey Pocket, our applications, again, Survey Swipe, our application, because this is actually off one of our employees' smartphones. The truth of the matter is that when you look at what's installed on a smartphone, you do get a huge list of information. A lot of these things are like this thing, Android backup confirm. A lot of them are applications that are specialized to the operating system. One of the challenges is filtering out, if you like, this noise and trying to find the things that are really important. For instance, you might want to know that everybody's got Yahoo News installed, or try and find people that have got that, or Bubbles, or Music FM. But this is actually mixed in with 30 or 40 or 50 other pieces of information. So one of the things we're working very hard on is how to make this information more relevant and how to filter out the noise. So that's looking on the left-hand side of what's installed, perhaps, well, what was installed on an Android phone. Now, on the right-hand side, I just took some information about what was running on an iOS machine. And we can see here, these are applications that people have actively running on the phone. So Skype, Voxer, which is a communication program, Instagram, always popular, Survey Swipe, which was in fact collecting this data, Crazy Kangaroo, which I think is a game, and Facebook, and Dropbox, which is a file management and sharing system, Skee-Ball, I believe, is a game. Now, this, I must emphasize, is what's running. We took a snapshot of what was running on someone's iPhone, and we were able to see these things. Again, this is a summary of what was running on the smartphone, on the iOS system, because again, we have a lot of other, if you like, programs, tasks running. I left the one at the top, kernel tasks, that's the core of the operating system running, that we have to learn to filter out before we can get the important information. However, if you were just wanted to say, okay, I want to see over all these people who's running Facebook, when they were in this particular location, you can in fact filter that information out, because we do have that. This isn't a terribly good picture, but it gives you an idea of what a snapshot. Now, a snapshot is where we just say, okay, across all these people, just gather this information, all these pieces of information that you can once. So it's just a sort of audit of what's going on with people, and it can be 100 people, it could be 1,000 people. We can get their location via their latitude and longitude, all the information that we documented before, but it's in a form where it's just a simple one-off snapshot. So we've got ideas of what they sent, and this can be useful for knowing where people are, if you like. You might take 2 or 3 snapshots a day to see how they navigate around. There is an issue, of course, which people, I think, know very well, that constantly tracking people's location via the GPS system can cause batteries to go flat and that kind of thing. That seems to be improving as time goes by, as the GPS systems become more optimized, and I think as batteries simply get better. And I know over the past year or so this has become less of a problem. When we first started looking at location, there was a big issue with it draining the battery if you continue to have the GPS module running. So the challenge of passive data is really that there's a lot of it. I mean, we can generate a lot of data. And this is something that I don't like the term big data, but does come onto this thing of big data. You get a lot of data. You've got to learn to manage that amount of data effectively. It's passive data, is not traditional survey data. We're getting data in that really we didn't see before. So reporting and analyzing it with the survey research techniques that we already use doesn't apply. We need to augment our existing analytics, perhaps with techniques such as time series analysis, which really would be useful in the accelerometer data. What that can do is say, okay, this was a significant change in activity relative to the previous measurements of activity. So that could be useful in really seeing when change happens. We need to develop different reporting abilities. We've also got to be careful about what does the data mean. Drawing conclusions from passive data will often require other information that has to be integrated with the passive data. And I think that's the case where our system runs via a panel where you have profile information on the panel, which, if you like, can color the meaning of the passive data. Of course, privacy is a huge issue. It's arguable that we have less privacy now. I think in the past we had the idea that we somehow had privacy, but actually a lot of things were very public. Phone systems were public. I can remember, because I go back to the time when dinosaurs roamed the earth, that you could have shared phone lines where people could hear what's going on. So really, I'm not so sure in the past we were that private. I don't think that the advent of the web and smartphones and all this kind of thing has really impinged of our privacy, but privacy, of course, is very important. With our application, after users have downloaded it, they're notified and opt-in to allow passive data to be collected from their device. We feel it's very important to do this. There aren't, in fact, any real guidelines that I know of concerning passive data. We just think it's important that people know that this data is being collected from them, and they do have the ability to opt out at any time. That is possible via some settings that they can access within the application. But if we look at this privacy issue, this rather pretentious Journal of Personal Cyber Consciousness, there's a great quote from this guy, Sebastian Sether, that says, "Thus in the future we'll be discussing privacy intrusions involving senses and types of information which we haven't conceived of yet." And I think passive data comes into that. 7 or 8 years ago, we wouldn't have been thinking about this kind of data. We would have been thinking about collecting it. But now it's there, and it's likely to increase. We don't know what else we're going to get out of these phones. And we actually done some little bit of research on the concepts that millennial generations have on privacy. And they say that, you know, more than 50% said they give personal information in exchange for incentive. That's good. Look, going forwards, it means that we can offer incentives to gather information from millennials. But 70% of the same people said they believe their personal data should be kept private. And there is a sort of dissonance. We asked these people, we asked some millennials versus boomers to go, okay, you know, do you object to your friends and family knowing where you are? And, you know, and both of them said, a lot of them said no, they didn't. A lot of them, you know, a fair proportion said yes. But even the people who said yes have location services running. When you do this and ask this question concerning companies, they're very vehement that they don't want the companies to know where they are. But again, these people have location services running on their phones, which potentially mean that people can find out where they are. I think there's a lack of understanding of the technology on smartphones, and I think that could cause us a problem with privacy in the future, as users begin to believe exactly what kind of information are on the phones and what kind of information people are collecting. I remember that it's a pretty good bet that the phone companies are collecting all this information as well as us. So it's probably something that's going to raise its head again as we go down the line, as we keep doing this. Going back to our application, with Survey Swipe, which is our smartphone interviewing system, you can have your own custom application to collect feedback via surveys or the passive data. If you have an existing mobile application, we do also have a software development kit which will integrate into that, giving you both the ability to conduct surveys within your application and collect this passive data. In summary, it's very clear to us that smartphones are the future. They're becoming essential to everybody. There are all sorts of. I saw one survey recently saying that, you know, people would rather not wash than have their smartphone taken away from them. I think I'd just get a waterproof smartphone in that particular situation. People buy things with smartphones. People do price comparisons, as I said before, with Shop Savvy. People share what they're buying on their smartphones via social networks. Passive smartphone data will increasingly allow us to see consumer smartphone behavior in an objective fashion. Thanks very much for listening, and now if anybody's got any questions, please ask them. We got anybody, Gina?
Not at this moment. I answered quite a few questions during the presentation.
Oh, good. I like that.
feel free to ask them now. Okay, I just got one. We just got asked if we provide sample for survey swipe software.
That can be done, yes, via a different division of the company, but yes, we do have a sample division called Q Sample, which can provide sample for that.
Okay. Okay, I have a few more questions.
Okay, good.
Do you know which apps are currently in active use on both iOS and Android? I think that's talking about the app usage versus the app.
Yeah, we can do that on iOS and Android. The running apps, we can gain access to their names.
And then I got a question. How does your opt-in policy work for phone app audits?
Well, I'm assuming that the opt-in that we say is we may collect information about applications on your smartphone, about what applications are running. So the opt-in process really covers all that information. And of course, the user does have the chance to opt out.
Yes, and Andrew, just to add to that, obviously when you're setting up the panel and setting up life metrics, you have the ability to select the metrics in which you're collecting. So that is the other piece. The panel administrator can control what data elements they're collecting, and in the terms of service, we do specify the types of data that could be collected. The user has to accept that, or else they cannot use the application.
All right, and another good question I just got is, can you talk more about combining passive data and survey data applications?
I can. I think the main thing here is that let's say you're trying to look at the behavior of millennials versus older people in a mall, in a store. Now you've got information there on what apps are being used. You've got information on where the people possibly go, although collecting GPS information indoor is really not possible. You can get information about how long they spend in the store. You can get information really about movement patterns. Now, as I said, the retail world has been looking at that, but you can find out perhaps some nuances in the way people behave within a certain environment via passive data. And it also gives you another form of demographic for you to segment your population on. For instance, you could possibly segment people based on their general activity levels, which isn't something we normally do. You may be able to segment them based on their data usage, based on how full their phones are of applications and things like that. We're getting different forms of demographic data that we didn't have before. And I think it will be exciting to see whether or not that will yield any significant information. I don't really like the word insight, but I'll use the word insight. Give us some insights into how the different populations behave.
All right, and here is another good question. This one is from Jennifer. And it's, do you have any information on user retention of the passive metering on phones, as is the length, incentives, turnover, etc.?
Not at the moment. Keep in touch, we will have. We've been doing a lot of overhauling of this system and about to revamp it. So I don't have any. I'm hopeful I'll have some in a couple of months.
Okay, great. Ask a couple more here. Okay, this is a question. If we provided our own sample, they would have to download the survey swipe software, correct? Is this managed on your end? And could you elaborate on the process? And that would be much appreciated.
You can answer that, Greg.
Okay, so yes, there's a few ways to handle this. You have to manage this yourself. So you have the ability to upload your sample into our panel management tool, and that way, when they download the app, they will be pointed to the proper community based upon the email address that they use. We also offer two other solutions. I can offer you a fully white labeled application where I can provide you your own application in the iOS and the Android stores with your own artwork, your own custom features and behaviors. Or if you have an existing application, we have the application has an SDK which you can embed directly into your own application and have full functionality available to you. It will still be administered. The survey swipe and the life metrics components will still be administered via survey analytics in our panel tool. Oh, yeah, and an interesting point is if you were doing your own recruiting and you had either the SDK or a white labeled app, you could do external recruiting using QR codes or our specific panel landing pages.
Yeah. Okay, great. And here is another question. This one is from Rich, and it is, what's your opinion of using GPS fencing that pings phones for research when they enter a zone or location?
We find there's a demand for this. Very definitely. I think that it's rapidly becoming a standard technique. Again, users give their consent for their location to be distributed. And yes, I mean, it's something that a lot of people, excuse me, a lot of people really want to do. So my opinion of it is I think it's very useful. Again, people opt in. We're not doing something that they don't know about. If they don't like it, they can opt out of that information being provided.
Andrew, I'm going to add one thing. If people would like to look on our blog, there's a previous seminar we did about recall must die. The reason that GPS is becoming so prevalent is we have the ability to get the feedback from the individual at the time of the specific interaction we're interested in. And the previous seminar you did regarding recall must die and the problems with time differentiation between data collection, I think that it just drives the point home that this is just going to be more and more common.
Okay, and then I have a question from Stephanie asking, how long has this technology been developed by Survey Analytics?
We've been working on this on and off for about a year or more. That's about it, really. And so we're really launching version 2 now. We've refined some of the collection techniques and some of the reporting.
Yeah, the core app's been out for 2 years. Life Metrics is on, it's probably its year anniversary, and we're in second or third version of Life Metrics specifically. We're just reviewing the remaining questions.
And then this was a, sorry if I missed it, is this possible on other operating systems?
Well, it might be. The next one that we may look at would be the Windows phones. I don't know. I suspect so, but there may be limitations. But a lot of these phones really have the same characteristics, and I think a lot of this information is used. Well, I know it's used by the providers, service providers, to monitor what's going on with people's phones. So I suspect it will be available on Windows. Anything else, I don't really know.
Okay, and then Rich also asked a question as far as recruiting customers for smartphone-based research, if you could recommend any best practices.
It depends on your target market. Target populations. Of course, smartphone usage is lower with older panelists. So that recruiting them is more difficult because there simply is less of them. I don't do recruitment of panelists. I can put you in touch with somebody who can give you more information about that. So, Jeannie, can you make sure you get contact information for Rich, and we'll hook him up with Rodley.
Absolutely. Okay. And then I have one more question about the output delivered on the back end. Is it just Excel-based data? I know you covered that earlier, that it was just available in XLS right now, but I know in the future that might change.
We'll probably do XLS and very soon do CSV. We're pretty sure that we won't be blowing any limits on XLS, but I do understand people might want it in CSV. In fact, that's really something that we need to put in pretty soon.
And we had a few people that requests about pricing and whatnot. I'm actually going to be sending out a replay of this presentation later this afternoon along with the slides attached. And you can just reply to that email and we'll be happy to follow up and talk more about the pricing tiers and whatnot. So, and there are no more questions at this time. So we're going to go ahead and close out the presentation. Thank you again for joining us and great presentation, Andrew.
Well, thank you, and thanks very much everybody for joining us. Have a good day.